slides for today's presentation.
Yeah, so just 1 second here. Now we are officially recording. Welcome everybody. We've got closed captioning for everyone. So we may be toggling with a little bit of technical stuff today, but we will get you the presentation shortly. And if you have questions in the chat, I will get to those as quickly as possible. Welcome everyone. Back to you, Samantha.
Awesome. Just some housekeeping. If you do have grant specific questions related to the administration of your grant, your contracts, or the funding, those are not, unfortunately, questions that Danny or I can answer today. Those are questions that do have to be directed to the commission team. The grants@women.ca.gov email is the appropriate email for those questions. So much as I would love to assist you with those questions in chat, I simply do not have the answers to them, nor would Danny. So just a heads up on that. If you at any point have to step out of the meeting or unable to attend the entire meeting, or someone else from your team was not able to attend, we will have a copy of the presentation and a recording of this video available. It is not a mandatory condition of your receipt of funding that you do attend these trainings. So do not worry if you have to step out or step off early, or if someone from your team is absent. We'll make sure that you do get a copy and that any questions related to the training are responded to. And again, if you do have questions specific to your grant or funding itself, that would have to be directed to grants@women.ca.gov. Awesome. All right, Ms. Kaiser, do we have slides?
We do. Queuing up in just a sec here.
So topic of today's conversation is on advocacy and communications. We're going to cover kind of two separate buckets, but they both have a lot of overlap with each other, and certainly value to the work that you all are doing. So first slide after the title is on the lawmaking process. So what we're going to cover today is, again, two parts. First, just the legislative process. What does it even mean? How do you engage and when? And then second piece, a conversation around press and communication specifically. So both how to get coverage for your work, as well as how to leverage that coverage in terms of the legislature. Danny, next slide. So this squiggly graphic is a pretty accurate depiction of California's legislative process. You may be familiar with the federal process, you may be familiar with California's, you may be familiar with the process in another state, but it does look different in all of those places. So California is a bicameral legislature, which means we have two houses, and we have a 2-year full-time legislative session. So we are concluding right now the end of a 2-year session. In January, we will embark on another 2-year legislative session. And that means that the creation and passage of legislation has a little under 24 months to occur before the clock sort of restarts and everything has to start over. So because we're bicameral, legislation can be introduced in either house, the Assembly or the Senate. And then it has to go through a very long process that's defined in this photo. You'll have a copy of these slides as well, and this drawing. They're actually in the invite for this event today, and we'll go out to you an email as well. But we're going to talk through each of these things in a little more detail today. Danny, you want to go next slide? So the idea for a bill, how do we even start with legislation? All legislation starts as an idea, as a concept. They can come from a variety of different sources. Obviously, many people are familiar with lobbyists and special interest groups who might bring forth a suggestion for legislation. That could be anything from a nonprofit to a government entity to a business, or even an individual, or even just a group of concerned constituents in a district. They can come from press and media coverage. Legislators love to write legislation in response to issues that they've read about in their local paper or in the national news. They can come in response to a crisis. For example, a great number of our state legislation over the years in response to gun violence has unfortunately come as the result of incidents that were very traumatic for communities across the state. Could come from personal experience of the legislator. For example, if you have a doctor like Senator Dr. Pan, who's terming out here in Sacramento, he's a pediatrician. He was a pediatrician for a great many years before he was elected, and he spent quite a bit of his tenure in the state Senate working on issues related to vaccinations and student health and children's health. Or it could come from friends and family, right? Legislators are people too. They listen to their friends and family just like we do. But the process begins for a bill when a senator or an assembly member from one of these sources decides that they're going to author a bill on a subject. Next slide. Awesome. So authoring a bill. How does this even work? The legislature has its own legal council called the Legislative Council. It's a room full of lawyers. Legislators do not draft their own legislation in most instances. Sometimes they might have an idea that someone helps them draft, but they do still go to the Legislative Council, to the lawyers for the legislature. Other times they may just write up a bunch of concepts that make sense to them personally, and the lawyers for the legislature will help them draft the bill. Some people may know, others I find are surprised to learn that you do not even have to have so much as a high school degree to be elected to the state legislature. There is no education prerequisite. You simply have to be elected by your peers. And so there's a wide range of expertise and education, and thus the legislature has its own well-versed bank of lawyers. There are deadlines by which legislation has to be drafted so that it can be introduced on time. And those deadlines occur at the beginning of each year. They're generally in January and February, and then sometimes extend up until March, depending on the circumstances. So in terms of timing, with some exceptions, if you're interested in having a legislator in your district or in the state who cares about your issue area, something you're working on, to introduce a piece of legislation, the time to be talking to them is now. If you're talking to them in February or March, you're probably too late. If the author of the bill is a senator, the bill is introduced in the Senate. If they're an assembly member, the bill is introduced in the assembly. And if the idea for the bill was provided by one of those special interest groups we talked about on the last slide, case in point, an organization or an entity, or even someone like the Commission on Women and Girls, they would be considered the quote sponsor of the bill. Which basically indicates to the public and to the legislature that the idea came from another entity or another individual. Next slide. Authors are very, very important. Members who chair various committees in the legislature, who are in leadership positions, and have other positions of
It looks like our friend Samantha is a victim of the power outages down there in Los Angeles. I will pick it up where she left off. So members of the committees, these chairs of the committees, I'm sorry, are generally those who take the most weight. They're the ones who are able to really move the needle on bills. And as the slide shows, you know, authors who are perceived as particularly partisan, leaning one way or the other, may have a difficult time moving a bill through both houses. So historically, what our firm has found is most helpful is making sure that you're always in contact with those legislators who are really, who have a history of working on your issues, who you know have voted on your issues. And of course, if you're able to get a committee chair in one of those really key committees as an author or a co-author, or even just a strong support, that is a very, very excellent thing in terms of the future of your bill. Also, the author's ability to know what you're talking about. This is, again, why it's really important to get ahead of these conversations and talk to offices. Get a sense from their chief of staff, their legislative director. What is that legislator's knowledge of this issue area? Again, going back to looking at their vote records, their history of authoring previous bills as well. So, introduction and first reading. So a bill is introduced and read for the first time when the bill number, the name of that legislator, and the description of the bill is read on the floor of the House. If it's an assembly bill and you have an assembly author, that means that your bill is going to be read on the assembly floor first. Then it's sent to the office of the state for printing. And from that point, the bill may not be acted upon for 30 days. And that is essentially to give the assembly, and often as well the Senate, a chance to really take a look at the bill. Sometimes there are special considerations that have to be taken before a bill can move forward. And then it looks like we have Samantha back on. Sam, are you here?
We're just playing musical host today. I told you.
This is why we're a team over here at Corbin and Kaiser. I've done this presentation as well before, so.
I told you we had some rolling blackouts over here today, so we're still, unfortunately, my laptop is feeling the repercussions of some of those. As Danny said, when a bill's introduced, I think one of the most important things for folks to realize is that it has 30 days from the time of its passage to when anything can be done with it. That means if the author changes his mind about introducing the bill, if there are amendments to the bill, concerns about the bill, there's this 1 month window in which there's an opportunity for the public, this is why this exists, to provide input, to ask questions, and to reach out to the legislator's office before any additional votes or action could otherwise be taken. All right, next slide. So once the bill's in print, once this window of time for some initial public review has concluded, the bill gets referred. You may have seen, and we'll get into a little bit more, in the initial draft drawing, there were policy committees. The legislature has a wealth of standing and select committees that are all based on specific issues and subject matter. And so, for example, if you are working on issues related to in-home supportive services or Medi-Cal, those all fall into the policy area of human services, and that has its own committee. If you are working on kindergarten or early education, there's an education committee in each house. So for
Samantha's on mute.
Samantha, you're on mute.
Got it. I got it. All right. Thanks, guys, for dealing with our various technical difficulties today. So basically, if you can envision an issue area, there is probably either a standing or a select committee for that measure. And so bills go through a process of referral in which, based upon their subject matter, they can get referred to one or upwards of even 3 committees of jurisdiction. And the purpose of those committees is to really have an in-depth conversation and provide opportunity for feedback and amendments on the issue of jurisdiction in that committee. So, for example, a bill to take my earlier comment about Senator Pan working on vaccinations. He ran a series of controversial bills related to vaccinations in the school setting. That involved public health, but it also, of course, involved education. And so those bills were referred to both the Health Committee and the Education Committee. And in each committee, only the subject matter relative to that policy expertise was heard. So in health, issues and amendments related to issues regarding health were heard. In the Education Committee, the aspects of the school setting were what were considered. And so it's very important to understand how and where bills get referred so that if you are engaging as a content expert or something that you're interested in, that you're providing the type of feedback that can even be heard or acted on in that committee. For example, if you were to show up in the education committee and talk about the medical setting, there's not a process for amendments of that kind in that committee. So you're basically showing up at the wrong place or the wrong time. So very important to consider the subject matter and the timing of conversations, so that if you do and ever engage on behalf of stakeholders that, or your own work or yourself, that you're doing so at a time where it's appropriate for people to be able to respond to what you're bringing to the table. Next slide. There's a great opportunity in these committees to influence the analysis of them. Some people are very excellent. Some organizations are very excellent about taking advantage of the committee analysis process. Others don't even know it exists. And it's a great opportunity for content experts who are out dealing with constituents, working with the public, particularly on issues of importance when it comes to or children's health or immigration. These committees each produce their own not only of the proposed law, but of its broader impact. And that is influenced heavily by people who reach out to the committee, who provide expert testimony, who provide written analysis of their own, and who offer their support or opposition. And so for every opportunity stakeholders to weigh in and to influence the decisions of the committee and the analysis that all of the legislators read to weigh their decisions. If you show up for the first time on the day of the committee, unless you have a particularly compelling story, you may already be too late to change the outcome of that day. I know we had a couple glitches. Do we have any questions thus far? Awesome. So there's a process of passing and referring. As soon as committees are heard and concluded, they refer a bill to the next committee. This process continues indefinitely, both through the first and second House of Origin. Even when a bill has not been referred to a committee, however, a committee chair can make a claim that bills or bills that have been recently amended, you may actually see a committee chair, a legislator who chairs a committee, call for a bill and request a hearing based on some claim of jurisdiction over the issue. So while it's unlikely, it does happen, in particular on very important or very controversial issues. Next slide. Awesome. Legislative floor, and they go through a process called the second
video. Sorry to interrupt, Sam. You might want to shut off your video. It might help with the audio. Thanks so much. All right, we're having a bit of trouble hearing you, Sam. I can take it over if you'd like. Zoom is supposed to make our lives easier, folks, but here we are. I will, when Sam's getting a little bit better reception, I'll kick it back to her. But second and third reading. So once a bill makes it off the floor of, say, the Senate, it will then be taken over, it will be read just as a sort of exercise in making sure that everybody has really had a chance to review the bill. It will go through a second and a third reading. And on that third reading is when the analysis is prepared and all of the legislators in that House, again, let's say the Senate, really have had a chance to review the bill, read the analysis, really weigh their options in terms of supporting or opposing the bill. And when that bill is read for the third time, it's explained by the author. The author gets up and has a chance to not only give their pitch about the bill, but then answer questions. And after that process, the vote is taken on the bill. It is at that time, as we are prepping for our bills to be heard on the floor, that we create something called a floor alert. It's a one-pager. It's like a very quick and easy to read rundown of what our bill is about and why they should either vote to support or oppose the bill. And then as we are distributing that floor alert to everyone, again, let's say this is in the Senate, it's up to you and your organization and all of the other groups who are in support of your bill to do what we call member level lobbying. That means we go in and we're talking to each distinct Senate office and we are counting their votes. Once we get up to the right number of votes and we're confident that our bill is going to be approved and voted on, then again, the senator will take that bill up on the floor for an official vote. All right, moving on. Passing out of the House of Origin. So the House of Origin means if it's an assembly bill, that means we're talking about how it has done in the assembly. So bills that require an appropriation, or AKA they cost money, or that have to take effect immediately, require usually a 27 vote in the Senate and a 54 vote in the Assembly. For your reference, there are, I believe, 40 seats now in the Senate and 80 in the Assembly. With redistricting, you'll have to excuse me. I can't remember if we added or if the number remains the same, but all other bills that do not require an appropriation are not going to cost the state any money and do not need to be put into effect immediately, only require 21 votes in the Senate and 41 in the Assembly. If a bill is defeated, the member does have the option to seek reconsideration and another vote. Generally, that means that he or she will take amendments to the bill, and then it will be brought up again for reconsideration. So rinse and repeat. So once a bill leaves its House of Origin, it then proceeds through its pathway in the next House. So if your Assembly bill has made it through third reading, got voted on by the entire Assembly, and it made it out, the next place it will go is its first Senate committee. So it's that entire process that we've just described. And once your Assembly bill makes it out of the Senate, then it will go back to the Assembly for concurrence. You may ask, what's concurrence? Concurrence is the process that the Assembly gets to look at the Assembly bill again. So I'm using this as an example. The Assembly bill made it all the way through the Assembly. It's made it all the way through the Senate. Chances are that bill has been amended at some point in time. So the process requires that the bill goes back to the Assembly so the Assembly can vote again and make sure that they're still in support of that bill. So that is the concurrence process. Before I move over, are there any questions thus far? I think we're going kind of fast. You're getting to see how the sausage is made.
It's fast, but it's clear.
Okay, thank you so much. Okay. And now the governor's office. So this is where we're at right now as we speak on September 13th. All of these bills from the Assembly and the Senate that have made it through their respective houses, have made it through concurrence, are now on the governor's desk. If any of you are checking the governor's newsroom pretty much every day or every few days, he is posting those bills that he has signed or vetoed. So the governor has three choices with these bills that are on his desk. He can sign the bill into law, he can allow it to become a law without a signature, or he can veto it. And a governor's veto can be overridden if there's a 2/3 vote by both the Senate and the Assembly. obviously when that happens, it's quite a lot of fireworks. So so once all of the bills have been signed, which by the way, has to be done by the last day of this month. So all bills that are on his desk essentially do need to be voted on by September 30th. And most bills will then go into effect on January 1 of 2023. The exception, of course, is urgency measures, which take effect immediately after signature. These are urgency measures that include, any response to something critical that's happening in the state, or a bill that has an urgency measure written into its language. In the case of, please mute yourself if unless you have a question. I don't want to cut off any questions, but yes, so if it has an urgency measure, then it would be within the bill language, would be included the date that it is put into law. So enrollment and Anna, I see you have a question. Dr. Everett?
Thank you. Actually, there was someone else who wrote a question in the chat up for the last page.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Hi, Danny, this is Colette. I was just, how does it become a law without a signature? I just didn't understand that process there.
So as Samantha said, thank you, Sam, for putting that into the chat. In California, we don't have what's known as a pocket veto. So if the governor doesn't sign that bill, it then becomes law by default. So if he's not actively vetoed the bill and said on, again, the newsroom, if you don't see it on the newsroom, he hasn't issued a press release saying I specifically veto this bill, then it's by default, it becomes the law. And so he has to make a point to actually kill a bill or veto it. That's how California's law has been structured. Does that make sense? Okay, it's a good question. All right, enrollment and chaptering. So bills that have passed the legislature and are approved by the governor are assigned a chapter number by the Secretary of State. That's sort of like their official coding. And these become part of California code. And California codes are the sort of, it's a collection of laws that are grouped into subject matter. So for instance, for the work that so many of you do, perhaps you would be looking at California code under health or education. Sometimes it's financial code. So as you all are working to put bills forward, there are resources out there that do include information on California codes. You'll forgive me, I don't know if Samantha or anybody else has additional information, but it's pretty easily accessible online to find those California codes. Communications and consideration. And for those who are able to access the chat, there are some really great information there that Samantha is sharing. Thanks so much, Samantha. Okay, communications and consideration. As we know in life, what is that old saying that you attract more with honey than with vinegar? So it's this sort of process of how do we go about approaching offices? How do we go about approaching staff? It's, I would say that generally speaking, when you're talking about approaching an office, they will know a thing or two about your issue area, but it's really good to have your information presented in a very easy to read, easily digestible set of FAQs. The history of your organization, the history that you of all the work that you do, and to know that sometimes staff don't have a whole lot of time. So again, that sort of one pager that you have, or links that you can send staff in email, that's incredibly helpful as you're looking for opportunities to work directly with legislative offices. Additionally, perhaps your organization or a group of organizations, you all could work together to put together an education opportunity. In the past, I know that clients of ours and some of the work that we've been involved in has included webinars. Those are incredibly helpful, especially because they can be recorded, and then and staff who can't take that that 30 minutes to an hour out of their day, they can then look at the link and learn everything that they need to know about your organization and your priorities. Knowing your timing, look at the California legislative calendar and figure out how far in advance you need to talk to those offices. As Sam said earlier, the sooner the better. Bill introduction and sponsoring, it comes up sooner than you think. So again, this fall is a great time to be reaching out to those legislators, especially the new ones, and getting a sense of what their policy priorities are going to be after the election in November. And then timing for suggesting amendments and or influencing bills. As the legislative year picks up and the bill is going through its different committees, just being very, very on top of the timing so that you know when your bill needs to be amended. If you're having a lot of opposition, are you meeting with the opposition? Are you having an open line of communication if possible? And how are you working out those amendments? And then timing your support and your opposition of bills. I would say generally across the board, the sooner you can get your support and opposition to bills in line, the better. And keep your ear to the ground. If you're hearing about other groups that are working on similar issues or have issues with similar issues, reach out to them. You never know where you're going to find coalition partners. And the timing of press and communications efforts. A lot of this comes down to how your bill is moving through its different committees. It's really great for you to have access and an open line of communication with your local press. Sometimes those press pieces and those media pieces and social media really, really do make a difference. All right. So communications and press. So why? Because you need to build your brand. You need to let the press know and let the public know what your organization is really working on. Within that press, you're going to obviously talk about your group's history, the work that you've already done, the work you're currently doing, the work that needs to be done, and then really just making a case for why there needs to be public engagement, and perhaps just as importantly, why groups and individuals should consider funding and donating to your organization. As we all know, if you see that really great news item, you hear that really great news item, you see something on Twitter, you think, wow, this is something that I want to get behind. And it helps other organizations to see, oh, okay, well, they're working on this, so are we. Perhaps we should be in touch with you and help your efforts. Strategies and outreach. So yes, reporters do get inundated with requests for stories. So how do you make yourself stand out? There are two types of strategies. You can be very proactive. You could start reaching out to press now. If you know that your organization is going to want to get behind a piece of policy or a budget request, contact that reporter now and let them know. Perhaps you wouldn't get a press piece right now, but it's definitely building up their knowledge of your issue area and what your goals are going to be for this next legislative cycle. The other strategy, of course, is reactive. A good example is of a bill that I sponsored. One of my clients sponsored this last year. We got an incredible amount of opposition right at the tail end. So we pushed to get a piece into the newspaper, one of the local papers, that really highlighted what the opposition was doing to harm low-income individuals. So this sort of reactive press was really good, because I was then able to take this link to this article and send it out to every staff member whose boss was going to be voting on my bill and say, okay, well, the opposition is saying this, but here's a highlight of what, you know, the opponents really do. So again, reactive. Two categories for outreach. So of course there's social and viral. Sometimes that could be easier because you are the ones who handle your own social media. And you already know. I think that probably the overwhelming majority of grantees who are here today have some sort of hand in their own organization's social media. You know how to retweet, you know how to repost. And so that's a really great and sometimes easier way to get your message out. But again, traditional media is always going to be great. If you can get that piece in a big newspaper, or you can get that piece in your local paper, so much the better. I will say, on the topic of local media, sometimes that's very, very impactful with legislators themselves. You know, if you are in Watsonville and you get something in a Watsonville, you're trying to get a Watsonville area's legislator to pay attention to the issue, and you get something in the Watsonville newspaper, just because that's a smaller town, it's actually very impactful, because it's their local paper. It's saying, okay, look, this is what your legislator is doing. That's just sort of an example of how small newspapers can sometimes be a really great catch too. And then social and viral outreach, a little bit more on that. So, you know, really looking at your storyline, looking at the content, keeping it to a consistent story, I think is really great, building on what you've already put out there. And then working within your network to get people to repost, to retweet. Also, if you reach out to your network with sort of templates, that's always incredibly helpful. I've seen some amazing social media campaigns where people have built out a Google spreadsheet, or just a Google Doc, sorry, not a spreadsheet, but a Google Doc. And it has links to graphics that you've created, links to perhaps other posts, but again, a template that says, you know, here's where you can talk a little bit about your organization, and here's why we need to really highlight the need for this bill or this action. Giving people a template, giving other organizations a template really helps to make it a turnkey experience for your colleagues. And it just makes it that much more likely that they're going to help you repost your story and get the word out. So in addition, you want to tag the relevant media contacts, all those newspapers, all those radio stations, all those legislators. And again, sending the relevant media contacts a direct message as well. That will really help. And then on the traditional side, back to our sort of paper newspaper, so to speak. If you aren't already doing so, start compiling a list of those relevant media contacts. Go to those newspaper websites and find out who the news editor is. Generally speaking, that the news editor is the one that you want to send your pitch to. As much as you can, start trying to develop a personal relationship with those relevant media contacts. Again, back to my earlier comment about local press. Sometimes that's a really, really, really good win. If you start building up your relationship with your local media. Develop your press releases. Again, create a template. Figure out what that template is, because it's always going to have some stuff that's evergreen about your organization. And as you're working through your policy agenda for the year, you can keep adding to it, editing it down, of course, but those press releases, keep developing them so that they that they really have the great information about the good work that you're doing this year. And put yourself perhaps on a time frame. Think about doing this on a monthly basis, sending out your press release to those relevant media contacts at the beginning or the end of the month. All right, media coverage services. Reacting. So various reporters, sorry, I'm just reading this. Samantha created this slide. I want to make sure I'm doing it justice. Samantha, I don't know if you're back and
Yep.
and you want to
hear me?
speak to this. Yeah.
Yep. Can you hear me?
I'll let you take
So-
this one.
So from a reactive sense, there's actually a variety of media coverage services. And what these are, some are free, some are subscription. They're places where reporters who are looking for content experts and sources go to post what they're looking for by subject. So they may post that they're looking for an expert on domestic violence, or they're writing a piece on single mothers and the impact of COVID. Or maybe they're writing a piece on people who are struggling with caregiving after the pandemic and during the pandemic. But whatever it is, there's a variety of sources listed here. There's a number of them. Again, many of which are free, or at least have a free trial. And you can go see what reporters are looking for and search by subject and actually respond to their inquiry as an expert source. So if you don't have the bandwidth or the expertise to put together your own press kit, you don't have a press team, maybe you don't have much of a social media presence, but you want to find things that are timely and relevant to include yourself in and your organization in, this list here is includes a variety of different places. Again, some are free, some have a free trial, some require a subscription, but these type of services are a home for reporters to actively look for expert testimony, expert sources, and people who can provide sort of rounding out of the content for the stories that they're working on. So these are a great place, again, if you don't have the bandwidth or you're looking to find people that are already talking about your issue, where you can do some outreach to someone who's already looking to talk to someone exactly like you, doing the work that you're already doing. And if you can continue to hear me, I'll keep talking. Another reactive strategy. Google Alerts is one, but there are other alert services that allow you to track keywords or phrases, or even your own organization's name or individuals in your organization. And this basically sets you up to receive an email or a text alert anytime that subject or that person or that organization is in the news. And that way you can be in a position to respond in a relevant way. Again, you can do it by person, but you can also just do it by subject. And when there's a subject that's relevant to you that's in the news, that's what's known commonly as a press hook. So what is the hook to get people to care about your issue that's relevant to what's going on right now? For a lot of organizations working on women's issues in the last few months, unfortunately, that has been the Dobbs decision, right? Changes to sort of a post-Roe v. Wade environment where we're looking at changes to reproductive health in multiple states as a result of the federal decision. There have been a number of nonprofits and a number of content experts who have been reactive, who have leveraged the press coverage on that change to really highlight the work of their organizations, help pass public policy in multiple states, and help raise money. So that's one way that tracking current news, tracking alerts on subjects or people could allow you the opportunity to react to something that's happening in a current timeline as far as the news or pop culture. And then in general, if you follow influencers and other reporters, you can always insert yourselves into their content. And so what is good content made of? Oftentimes it's not about recreating anything. You may actually already have really interesting content. You just maybe don't realize it's something that the press would be interested in. And so the type of things that folks are interested in, reporters are interested in, things like original research. Have you documented something through your work and can speak to the importance of something or how it works, and you can show data through your work that's new and different and compelling? That's important. Reporters love that type of stuff. Expert opinion or commentary. Are you a leader in your field? Can you provide expert opinion? Interesting graphics with visual appeal. This is very much a social media thing right now. Quick, easy to absorb and access and see content that people can learn from or find entertaining. Do you have a newsworthy story or a human interest piece within your organization or the work that you're doing? These are all sort of in the bucket of things that when you're looking to approach a reporter or put together a pitch, and moving on to the next slide, there's some questions to ask that you can really have a kind of honest internal dialogue and figure out, is my pitch compelling? And so one question to ask yourself is, what makes my content newsworthy? My social media, my press kit, my otherwise. And one of those, to reflect on something I've just said, is your content timely? Does it relate to something that's happening now or soon or just happened? So in the case of, for example, the Dobbs decision, reproductive health became something that was a press hook for a lot of organizations to attach to. Another example is the ongoing pandemic and the fallout from COVID-19. There is a lot of funding and a lot of conversation about public policy on that issue. So, is your work relevant there, right? That is in fact the reason why all of you are on this call today, because it was determined that it was relevant and important to dedicate funds to helping women post-COVID. So the timeliness and the relevance of your outreach to what's happening in the world, to what's happening in your community, it's very, very important to be able to not only know that you are timely and relevant, but to be able to explain to a reporter why your work and your story is timely and relevant. Does your content have human interest? Would the average person actually want to hear about it? Would they benefit from learning about it? And do you have an influencer? Does your content feature an influencer? There's, a great number of occasions where getting an expert or a celebrity into an issue has really highlighted that issue. Case in point, Selma Blair has a very rare genetic disease, which she's been very public about dealing with. And it's been sort of a boon to the nonprofits and advocates that work on that issue, because you have, a well-known actress that has sort of identified with that cause. And so who are your influencers that you can align with in community with the work that you're doing to help tell your story and increase its newsworthiness? And that is all we have for today in terms of coverage of both the legislature and advocacy and communications. Although as a sort of concluding remark and sentiment, I will say that legislators love press. They love to make decisions to introduce legislation based on what is in the press. They make decisions to support or oppose other people's bills based on press. And once they have done those things, they love to get positive press. And so sharing your work publicly and getting that type of coverage really does create opportunities to elevate and increase advocacy around funding for the type of work that you do. It also creates opportunities for changes in public policy that legislators may not be aware of until they learn about the need through the coverage and the communication that you've been able to build through your work. And with that, we're a little bit early, even in spite of technical difficulties. I'm looking through the questions. So great questions in chat. So please, if you have other questions, and either raise your hand or put them in the chat box. But Jane, that's a great question. A press kit is different than a press release. A press release typically no more than 2 pages. And it's specific to a moment in time. Perhaps you have a press conference coming up. Perhaps you have a specific report that you're releasing. So for example, when the announcement about the grantees for the Women's Economic Recovery Grant was made, a 2-page press release was issued to reporters explaining what the grant was, why it existed, who the grantees were, and the type of funding that they would be receiving as a result. So kind of a one-time thing. However, there's a much larger press kit for the commission on its overall work that explains who is the Women's Commission, what do they do, what are their different projects, what is their accomplishments over time, what issues should I call them to talk about, and who should I call? And maybe includes things like a case study or a story or a testimonial. So a press kit is really something that you want to be a little bit evergreen, that you can give to a reporter or an outlet or an organization you're just developing a relationship. And it says, this is who we are. This is what we do. Here's what we're experts in. And please contact us, these people and these numbers, when you're covering a story that's on our issue. If you're covering hunger for children in communities, call us. If you're talking about getting water out to homeless encampments at 114 degrees, we're your people. So what are those things that if a reporter was going to do a topical or a seasonal story on, that you would want to be first on the phone line? Your press kit helps tell that story so that you can stay top of mind and they have relevant background so that they might reach out to you proactively in the future. Does that make sense, Jane? Or others?
I see that Dr. Everett has her hand up. I'll unmute you.
Thank you so much. So yes, I'm with the Santa Barbara County Commission for Women, and I'm terming off after 6 years. The last official act that I'm doing is called Destigmatizing Menstruation and Period Positivity. We're doing that webinar this coming Thursday. I put the flyer in the chat. But what I wanted to say was when I signed on, I thought we were going to be talking about the grant. And so when Danny said, well, we're not going to be talking about it, we're going to be talking about something else, I was like, oh man. But then I said, well, let me just at least find out, what's going on. I'm so glad I stayed because this information is so useful. Even though I'm terming off of the county commission, I'm on the National Association for Commissions for Women. So this information is so helpful. I appreciate it very much. And for those of you who can join us on Thursday, please feel free to do so. But thank you so much for this. Very helpful.
Thank you so much for that work and for your years of service. That sounds like a great event. Awesome. And then I see Ms. Moore, Colette Moore had a question on who supported funding for these grants. That's a great question. The Women's Caucus, the California Legislative Women's Caucus, has been an advocate for funding. In particular, one of the chairs, Senator Skinner, has been an excellent advocate, Senator Nancy Skinner out of the Bay Area. There are also other members who serve on the commission or have served on the commission who've been excellent advocates. Assembly member Rebecca Bauer-Cahan, for example, is another. The governor's office has been involved in making sure that this funding is available and continues to be available. And before this grant concludes in March, one of the things that we would like to be able to do with those of you who are interested is give an opportunity in person in Sacramento for you to really showcase the work you're doing and how additional funding has helped you do it, with the hopes that legislators will once again continue to and hopefully expand funding in this area. So some of the things that we talked about today, we'd really love to workshop with some of your organizations between now and the end of this grant term to really kind of get intensive and help you tell your story in a way that really helps legislators tangibly see that the money they put out made a difference, and that frankly they should do more of that. So there is a method to our madness that relates back to this grant, and it's really making sure that y'all have the opportunity to continue getting funding, and other organizations like yours can get funding as well. Our hope would be that this isn't a one-time thing, even though it was the first of its kind, and that the state legislature will, in fact, in subsequent years, look at continuously investing in women and women's programming. Do we have other questions or comments?
Again, if you didn't already see that it was in the invitation, the Google invite, there is a link to the slide deck that Samantha and I presented. And there will be a recording of this. Any other questions, please feel free to put them in the chat or raise your hand and I will unmute you.
Otherwise, we'll let you go early with 20 minutes of your lives back. I see smiles to that. You can't hide it. All right, thank you all. And thanks for the work that you all do.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Bye.